All right. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Industry Topics, ECE 5984. It's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker this semester, Mr. Ed Reynolds. Ed is a program manager in the space exploration sector at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab in Laurel, Maryland. Mr. Reynolds was named to the 2023 Time 100 list of most influential people for his role at the Applied Physics Lab in leading NASA's Double Asteroid Redirection Test, or DART mission, which is the first ever demonstration of asteroid deflection technology. As the APL project manager for the mission, Mr. Reynolds led hundreds of team members from the lab, industry, academia, and government in the design and development of the DART spacecraft. He has held leadership roles in many lab-managed NASA missions, and Mr. Reynolds has a master's degree in project management from the George Washington University and a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from Virginia Tech. So without a further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Reynolds. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. It's asking me to start a video. Do I need to do anything? Okay, so I'm going to try to manage my slides so that right at quarter to the hour, I should be finishing. So here goes. So I've titled it DART and Other Missions, Successes and Failures. DART, as you kind of heard, it got a lot of press 2 years ago. We launched a spacecraft, we slammed it into an asteroid, and we changed its trajectory. And that was all for planetary defense purposes. It got a lot of public attention, and with the public attention, it got a lot of recognition. So, everyone thinks success, you just design, everything's a success, but there's failures along the way and one of the things I want to impress upon you is in your career, you will have failures. Don't look at them as failures, look at them as opportunities to learn. And so you will learn more from your failures than you will from your successes. And with that will enable future successes. So this is me in the picture. I'm the young guy on the left. This is me right out of Virginia Tech. So I was bachelor's degree, electrical engineering, 1985. I was a co-op student, so I would, in the 5 years at Blacksburg, actually 1 year I was really in Philadelphia, where instead of semesters we had quarters, and every other quarter I was at Tech, and the opposite quarter I was in Philadelphia working at a Navy lab. And so it took me 5 years to get through my bachelor's degree. Graduated on a Saturday. I was at work on a Monday because I was poor, and so I needed money. So for 39 years, I've been at the Applied Physics Lab. Along the way, in 2015, I did pick up a master's degree in project management from George Washington because it was good for my career, so I did it. Of the 39 years at APL, Applied Physics Lab, 10 years were as an integration engineer. That's what you see me doing in the photo. I'm putting together spacecraft. So it's electrical engineers putting together spacecraft, working with mechanical engineers and thermal engineers. Then after 10 years, I did system engineering, which instead of putting together spacecraft, you got to think about, what was the mission you were trying to do and how to design a spacecraft to do it. What were the requirements, and how would you prove that you were meeting requirements? After 10 years of that, I moved into project management, and I've been project manager for 19 years. These are the big missions I worked on. Polar Bear is the little guy you see on the right. It's about 350 pounds. DoD mission looked at the aurora borealis and looked at how well radio traveled through the plasma phenomenon that creates the aurora. So that was all for the DoD. There were some Star Wars missions or Strategic Defense Initiative missions that were in there. They came and went. Then there were a bunch of NASA missions, and I've got slides for each one of these. One is NEAR, which was a near-Earth asteroid rendezvous. This was the first time, prior to NEAR, US spacecraft had flown past asteroids, but it was very quick, got a couple images, and that was it. This was the very first time anyone had put a spacecraft into orbit around an asteroid. So it was a very, very successful mission, and it was our first foray into deep space. Right about that same time, the Cold War ended, and so there was a lot of effort to work with the Russians to basically keep the Russians from working in places like Iran and North Korea. But so we teamed with the Russians, and we did a lot of things with sounding rockets, looking at plasma above the atmosphere. Russians had space nuclear reactors for various reasons. We wanted to explore the US developing another space nuclear reactor, so we worked with the Russians on that. Then there's the Contour mission, and I'll talk about that right at the very end of my talk. Contour was to fly by comets. It ended in failure. I'll talk about that failure right at the very end of my talk. And then there's Stereo and DART. Those are NASA missions, and my current mission is something called IMAP. Just personal note about me, I have 3 daughters, 25, 23, and 21 years old. The VT next to the 25-year-old, she is an architect student. She graduated from Virginia Tech with a master's a couple of years ago. So I just highlight that when I talk to Virginia Tech people. Applied Physics Lab, it's a part of Johns Hopkins University. There's about 9,000 people working there today. The primary sponsor is the US Navy, so we do all things that the Navy might need in terms of development and just their overall performance. The Applied Physics Lab started during World War II. The US Navy had a need to protect its surface ships from dive bombers in the Pacific Theater. They came up with instead of a timer fuse, a simple dumb timer fuse, they came up with a radio frequency fuse that is, as the anti-aircraft projectile was going up, if it came across something that was metal that was reflecting back, like an airplane, it initiated a detonation. So that really had a substantial performance in the protection of the Navy fleet. And from that, the Navy fell in love with us. The funny thing with this image, you see in the image at the top, that's a used car dealership. That was the people who were developing these fuses and building these fuses and sending these fuses out to the theater were working in an operating used car dealership that was clandestinely building these fuses in the back. And so that is the very first building of the Applied Physics Lab. It's a used car dealership. The picture at the bottom is APL today with its 9,000 people. We have big buildings. We have a lot of capability. I'm just going to leave it at that. The space sector itself started when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. And we had engineers just on their own free time. They knew that Sputnik was going to travel overhead, and if they took their test equipment outside with an antenna, they could probably listen to Sputnik. And so in just them playing around and trying to just pick up the signal, they noticed that they did track the signal, and they did, as it approached, they noticed the Doppler shift, as the high frequency shift as it passed overhead. And they realized that if we had satellites up in space that were just transmitting their ephemeris information about where they were, and if we could on the ground make measurement, receive that information, and measure the Doppler shift, we could start triangulating off of different spacecraft. And this was the very first GPS satellite constellation. That concept was born at APL. our space sector was born out of that concept. And so we came up with something for the Navy. It was called the Oscar satellite, not to be confused with the amateur radio people. They have their own Oscar satellites, but about the first 30 spacecraft that we built were all navigation satellites for the Navy. After that, we moved into small scientific satellites. These were small, some were 100 pounds, some were up to 300 pounds. And then, that's what we were doing for decades. We were just building small spacecraft that orbited Earth. They did nothing fancy, they just orbited Earth and they were small. And then came NASA's Near-Earth Asteroid Rendezvous mission. And so this is my slide for that mission. And so you can see the spacecraft over on the right. It's not 300 pounds, it's 2,000 pounds. That's the cover art that you see there of what we proposed to NASA. And so this was bold for APL. Up until this moment, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory had done all the deep space missions, except for NASA Langley had done the landers on the landers on Mars. Just a couple landers, but other than that, JPL owned deep space. We proposed a planetary mission. It was simple, it was low cost, $125 million back in 1992. NASA was tired of a monopoly. They wanted to break it, so they gave us the money. I think they didn't care if it worked or not. They wanted to break the monopoly that JPL was dictating what missions were going to happen at what time. And so we did it. If you look in the photograph, the guy on the very far right with the dark hair, that's me, up on the ladder. But we did it. It was successful. It had a little hiccup along the way where the first time we tried to go into orbit around the asteroid, we actually went into safe mode, and it took us another 2 years to recover and successfully go into orbit around the asteroid. We did. We orbited it for 1 year, and then unplanned, it was not part of our mission, we actually landed the spacecraft on the surface of the asteroid and collect science data for 2 weeks that we beamed back to Earth. That was very, very valuable. But the key thing with this was the opening of the door that we were a player in deep space. So right after NEAR, we did Contour. So this was huge, huge success. A lot of hubris. We thought we could do everything. So we were kind of full of ourselves. And so right after this is Contour. I'll talk about that right at the very end of this talk. But lesson learned, don't get too cocky. So this is one spacecraft that I managed as a project manager. It's called Stereo. It was 2 spacecraft. Each one of these are about 2,000 pounds. We launched them in 2006. We actually used the moon, lunar gravity assists, where we propelled one ahead of Earth and it drifted away from Earth, leading Earth. And the other one did the opposite. We used the moon and propelled it in the opposite direction. It drifted away from Earth, lagging Earth. We could set up geometries doing that. So if my head is Earth, these 2 spacecraft were drifting away, and you all are the sun. We could start taking images of coronal mass ejections coming off the sun right at Earth. So we were doing that imagery of these coronal mass ejections, and we were making other measurement properties of the coronal mass ejections as they headed to Earth. So this was a successful mission. It lasted it was designed to last for 2 years. One lasted for 8 years. It made it all the way to the backside of the sun before it had met a failure. The other one continued to operate successfully and still operates successfully today. It's gone at least 16 years. But these are single-string spacecraft. There's no redundancy in these spacecraft at all. And then this is the mission I'm managing right now. So this is IMAP. It's called Interstellar Mapping Acceleration Probe. It will launch next July from Kennedy Space Center. It's a spinning spacecraft. We're going to put it at the L1 libration point, and that's the point in space where the gravity pull of Earth is exactly equal to the gravity pull of the sun. It's a relatively stable place. There's spacecraft there right now. So being at that point, we're 1 million miles away from Earth. We're about 91 million miles away from the sun. It's a good advantage point for things like coronal mass ejections and solar disturbances that are coming toward Earth that might disturb things like power grids and airlines, to give them a warning that a solar event is coming. In addition to acting as a solar sentinel, we actually will map out the shock point in which the solar wind from the sun runs into the interstellar wind from deep space that's never been mapped before. We know it exists. We've punctured that point 3 times with the 2 Voyager spacecraft and with the New Horizons spacecraft. So we have 3 data points of where it is, but we've never really imaged it. This spacecraft will image it over a period of 3 years, so we will have a full map of that shock boundary of the bubble that we live within. So this picture was taken 2 weeks ago, and then this picture was taken last week. Because it spins, we have to spin balance it before we put it on the rocket. So this is it spinning at 65 RPM. These are other missions that APL has done or is doing. The one on the top left is interesting. It's called Dragonfly. It's an octocopter. It will go to Saturn's moon Titan. So that atmosphere is not air. That atmosphere is methane. So it's got to operate in the air while we're on Earth, and while we launch, it's got to operate in deep space, and then it's got to operate in a very cold methane environment. The one next to it is Europa Clipper. It goes to a very, very high radiation environment at Jupiter. It will study the moon Europa. This will launch next month from Florida. And then there's a mission to the Messenger mission to Mercury, the Van Allen probes mission to the Van Allen belts, the Solar Probe mission to the Sun. Two things about this. This spacecraft is the closest we've ever been to the Sun. It is the fastest man-made object we've ever made. And every time we do a solar pass where we've picked up a little bit more energy from passing by Venus, it gets a little bit faster. So it's always breaking its own record. And then the one on the bottom left is the mission that went past Pluto and went past a Kuiper Belt object and continues to go further into deep space. So the reason I'm here, I think the reason I get people's attention is the DART mission. So I'm going to just go through DART real quick. So this is not hypothetical. These dots are real asteroids. These are the asteroids that we know. So we're not alone. There's a lot of asteroids out there. We're constantly hit by asteroids every day, every minute. They just happen to be about the size of pieces of sand. But there's bigger and bigger asteroids that we worry about. So this is kind of just to tell you that we're surrounded by planets, but we're also surrounded by asteroids. This is a little video clip, but basically there was a big event back in 2013. This is I think this is a 25-foot asteroid. It's not terribly big as things go. 25 feet could fit in this room. But this exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia. And public service announcement, if you see a bright light in the sky, don't run to the windows. Run away from the windows. But this asteroid, it heated up, it exploded in the atmosphere. Everyone ran to the windows. The shock wave burst all those windows. No one died. A lot of people went to the hospital. But that's 25 feet. That's not big. This just shows you like the last 20 years. This is what 20 years of big asteroid hits look like. That one shown in red over Russia, that's the Chelyabinsk asteroid. Everything else for since 1988 until now has been smaller than the Chelyabinsk. So we're not really terribly worried, 20 meters, I'm sorry, not 20 feet. We're not terribly worried about 20 meters or smaller. That's something that we can deal with using civil defense. It's when you start getting bigger than 20 meters that you start having to look to missions like DART to actually figure out a way to try to to move the asteroid, try to keep it from hitting Earth. So there's Chelyabinsk. There's two other events that are shown here. There's Tunguska, which back in 1908, there was an asteroid that hit Siberia. It was 60 to, about 100 meters in diameter. It hit Russia. It hit an unpopulated area of Russia. It created huge devastation for about 50 miles, just knocked down all the trees for 50 miles, killed all the animals for 50 miles. I think there were a couple people in that 100-mile diameter. They died, but big event. It would be catastrophic if something like that hit a city. And then there was the dinosaur killer. That was not measured in 100 meters. That was measured in tens of kilometers. And that's what killed the diameter. So here's just by the numbers. The key message here is like the big stuff we know about, like the 10,000 meter diameter asteroids. There's 4 of them in our solar system. We know where they all are. We know that they're not a threat. There are some that are about a kilometer in diameter. We know where 90% of them are. We have a mission that's going up soon in the next couple of years that will start mapping out, systematically mapping out the solar system on everything above, I think 160 meters and bigger. So a lot of this big stuff we will have completely mapped out by 10 years from now. And then there's this area that we're concerned about. It's like the size up to 160 meters and, and down to about 25 meters in diameter. Those are the areas that we worry about. We don't know where all those asteroids are. We're trying to make attempts to map out as we're trying, get better and better at mapping things out. We're not there quite yet. So that's kind of the area of concern that missions like DART are meant to address. So to do that, NASA has the Planetary Defense Coordination Office. It's funny that it's not the military. Natural events that affect Earth are not the purview of the military. It's civil organizations like NASA that have to take that scope. So NASA created the Planetary Defense Coordination Office. They're the ones who try to find and detect all of those asteroids. So that they've got missions that are under development right now that are shown here, but it's basically ground-based assets and space-based assets, like this NEOWISE mission. That will launch probably in 2028. And over a 10-year period, it will map everything. I think it's 140 meters in diameter and above systematically. And then its detection is probably much better than that. So it will probably be better and better as you be able to detect the smaller stuff too. But then in top of trying to figure out where things are and are they a threat to Earth, there's what do you do about it? And so you see like mitigate, DART, that's kinetic impact. And then there's FEMA exercises, which is just all civil defense. If things are small enough and you've got enough time, you just get everybody out of the way. And if it creates $10 billion of damage, you can rebuild. So there's just getting out of the way using civil defense. People like FEMA is part of that strategy. If it's bigger than that, you can't get out of the way. You need something to move it. And so this is kind of a map of just all the tools in the toolbox. So if it's small, it's civil defense. If it's larger, it's kinetic. There's some technologies out there like tractor, where you just put something big next to an asteroid and just the gravity pull, you can start pulling it just out of the way. And then if it's really big, you have to go to tools like nuclear, which has never been tested. And it would be difficult to test just because of treaty constraints. So that just shows the DART mission, the size of the asteroid that we hit versus where we are in the toolbox. So this is our mission. We didn't hit the main asteroid. We actually hit a moon of an asteroid. So if you look at our knowledge of asteroids in space is very rough. Like, the way we track asteroids, we track them as light. We track them for a couple days, and then we come back a month later, and it's over here, and we track it, and we put curves. And if we had to tell you where it is in space, we couldn't tell you within 100 miles. Our error bars on our knowledge, because our tracking for short periods of time is so rough that even if we were able to tell you where it is to within, meters, if we hit it, if we hit it with a spacecraft as a test, we're only going to move it 10 millimeters a second at best. That's this much in a second. So if it's just an asteroid in space and we hit it, the error bars on where it was to begin with versus where it is after we hit it are so big we'd never be able to make the measurement. But if you go after a moon orbits its mother object very precisely. It's simple math. If you hit it and change its orbit period by seconds, just by looking at light curves from a distance, you can pull out that very precisely, and that's exactly what we do. So it's a beautiful mission. So this is the target. It's Dimorphos. It's that little guy about the size of a pyramid. It's orbiting a larger asteroid called Didymos, which is 780 meters in diameter. We had never seen Dimorphos. We just saw its effect on light curves. But for time, I'm going to just skip ahead. This shows, a moon orbiting a larger asteroid, and you kind of see what the shine of two moons together, two objects together, does to overall brightness, and then one passing in front of the other, you see a dip, and then you see the moon going behind, you see another dip. But if you look at those dips, you can pick out a very precise period that you can measure down to less than a second. And so, our moon orbits the larger body over a period of 12 hours. It was 11 hours and 50 minutes. And we were looking to change it by about 10 minutes. So it's you can pull out 10 minutes in that light curve. So we did all this measurement using ground telescopes. There's a list of all the ground telescopes we use. We also use James Webb Telescope and the Hubble Space Telescope to make these light curve measurements. And so here's the technologies that we put on our spacecraft. I'm not going to talk about a lot of them, but we used autonomous smart navigation. And so we used a lot of missile guidance technology that we had at APL. Remember, we support the Navy. So we worry about the performance of missiles and the guidance algorithms. So we adopted a lot of missile technologies in our SmartNav autonomous navigation system. To feed the system, we had a telescope imager, and that's called Draco, and that's shown here. And this is something that we had just taken out of the New Horizons telescope design and just adapted it for our mission. And then we had our CoreSat avionics. You guys are Double E's, so there's a lot of FPGA power in this box. Instead of buying microprocessors and putting them on boards, we tend to put FPGAs on boards now. And then we buy the IP for processors and program the FPGAs to become processors. The one other thing I'll talk about is, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to listen, did it really fall? So we actually carried a very small satellite with us called LICIACube. It was built by the Italian Space Agency. And 2 weeks before we ejected this. It became its own autonomous mission, and its mission was to basically watch us as we hit the asteroid and then kicked up a debris field after we hit. So I got 10 minutes. So when we launched, we actually used Jupiter and Jupiter's moon as a proxy for a large asteroid and moons around a large asteroid, so that worked real well. This just shows us tracking it before launch, I think, just to show where, this is where light curves came from. But that dot that you see moving across the field, that's both asteroids together. Again, no one has seen what this asteroid looks like. We don't know what Dimorphos looks like at all. It could look like any of these shapes. It could be donut, for all we know. But we just see what it does to light curves. It just creates a curve that gets brighter and dimmer, and we have to glean what it looks like. And even days out, like even 30 days out, this is the tally-ho moment where our onboard camera can actually image that dot. And then when you get down to even 30 days, 10 days, 8 hours, 4 hours, it's still a dot. And even 60 minutes, it's still a dot. That's both asteroids together. It's only when you get to like 4 or 5 minutes out that you actually see a moon and a larger asteroid. We actually had to program this spacecraft so that the last 4 hours, it was flying completely autonomous. It was completely robotic, autonomous. We weren't steering it in any way. The only thing we could do is we could look at its overall performance and we could adjust parameters. We could adjust gains, we could adjust brightness, contrast, thruster gains, but we just let it, 4 hours out, we let it go, we monitored it, and it turned out, even though we could adjust over 1,000 parameters, we did not adjust a single one. We just let it fly, and it flew itself into the asteroid. And it had to be smart enough to discriminate between the two bodies, and we wanted it to hit the small body. If it hit the larger body, it would have been a useless piece of information. We would not have gotten that orbit change, and we would not have been able to make any good measurement. So it had to be smart enough to recognize the moon. If this object had other moons, it had to be smart enough to go after the brightest of the moons. So this kind of show you that even like 2 minutes out, it's beginning to show up like a blob. It's only the last minute that you actually start seeing real detail. And so the other thing we did is we wanted to get good images as we flew in. And if you look at the picture, it's got these big floppy solar arrays that if you fire a thruster, that excites the arrays and everything will wiggle for many, many seconds. So we actually tuned the algorithm so that when we were 2 minutes out, we shut down thruster firing. So we just shut down thruster firing so that those solar rays would just settle down and we'd have like no vibration. We'd have really sharp imagery. So if you're traveling at 16,000 miles an hour, or I think 15,000 miles an hour for 2 minutes, it's like being over the Indianapolis 500 Speedway and turning off your thrusters and just drifting into the infield of the baseball stadium at Camden Yards in Baltimore. So it's like those algorithms that are used are very, very good. So this is just a nice intro to the Italian CubeSat. It looks cute as we kick it out. This is just spacecraft going together. The key thing I'd like to point out here, look at the date, May 2020. March 2020, we were in the very beginnings of a pandemic. So while everyone was at home, sheltering in place, we actually had to come in and work together in a group. And so we had to figure out how to work in bubbles and how to have bubbles not cross-contaminate other bubbles, but we made it work. And so July 2020, it's getting more and more crowded. This is us controlling the spacecraft from one of our control rooms. September 2020, the spacecraft's put together enough that we can do performance testing. This is it fully complete, going into a vacuum chamber January 2021. These are those big floppy solar arrays. They're big because we had an ion propulsion that we were testing as well as just powering the spacecraft. But this is the thing that we worried about vibrating as we were going into the asteroid. This is the Draco imager prior to going into the spacecraft. This is the Draco imager in the spacecraft. This is just us inspecting. This is the Italian CubeSat going into the spacecraft. These are two happy Italians. They had been locked up in Italy for most of the COVID, so this is their first time, their first excursion out of the country. This is us going to the launch site. This is the last photo of the spacecraft on Earth. And then this is it sitting on top of the rocket. That's the launch. So this is the tally-ho moment. This is where we're, I think, 30 days out, and this is the first image that we're We're actually tracking the asteroid with the Draco imager. These are real photos. These are images from the real encounter. You can see 68 minutes, we're getting a good dot. 2.5 minutes out, we're getting that blob. 12 seconds, we're getting the Easter egg. And then there's 2 seconds out. This is one of the last images that we took. And this is the last image that we took. We were 7 miles above the object, heading in at like 15,000 miles an hour. That Italian CubeSat, this is a collage of the debris field that we created. Everyone expected like almost a starburst, like things would come off very, very clean, straight, and radially. If the people that analyze this image, they're astounded by kind of the curvature of all of this debris coming off of the asteroid. They're also able to count 32 boulders flying in space in this image. And then we created a tail. We kicked off, lots of debris came off. It got captured by, it was hit by just the solar radiation pressure and started moving away from the asteroid, creating this tail. I think this is 10,000 kilometers long. This tail lasted for almost a year. And so it was pretty, there's news articles now that say 10 years from now, there will be meteorites. You will have meteorite showers at certain seasons that are created by this impact. So there's a follow-up mission. So the Americans did the hit. The Europeans are going to go look at the damage. And so there's next month, same week as Europa Clipper launching, the Hera mission will launch from Kennedy Space Center. And it will go look at both asteroids. And one of the things it's going to go look at is, did we leave a scar? And so now we got like 3 minutes left. So this is the Contour mission, the tagline, you learn more from your failures than your successes. And so Contour was right after NEAR. It was meant to fly by 3 comets. It's a NASA mission. And this was proposed during NASA's, NASA came up with this term, faster, better, cheaper. It was like 25 years ago, that was the darling phrase of NASA. And so the problem was, everyone knows what faster is. I mean, you build things quicker. They know what cheaper is, but no one defined what better was. And so it was choose your adventure. No one said what better was. And so, they were accepting proposals from everybody, and so everyone kind of said the cheapest one will win. And so Contour was our foray into faster, better, cheaper. And so one of the ways that we were better was we came up with a design concept in which we used a small embedded rocket, solid rocket motor, that we would just launch, instead of launching directly into deep space with a large rocket, we would use a small rocket, launch into Earth orbit, and then at perigee, we would fire that solid rocket motor over the Indian Ocean, and that would be our escape energy to go onto this trajectory to fly by comets. ESA's Giotto mission had done it when it went to go fly past Halley's Comet. There was another mission, a communication satellite called Indostar-1. It had an embedded solid rocket. So we were basically, we were using a small rocket, but then the kind of the thing that we did bad was we were relying on these predecessor missions as the overall design concept, and we were pulling what we thought was good data, just that was available. And then I underline this, without rigorous review of design data or expertise. So we never brought in the Europeans who did Giotto or the folks at Fairchild who did Indostar and say, hey, here's our design, here's our design data. What do you think? Because if we had done that, they would have pointed out that we had an error in our in our heat flux tables that we were using for our solid rocket motor geometry. And so we overheated. NASA did it after we failed. The way we failed is we basically disintegrated. It's a 50-minute burn of that solid rocket motor. At like 49 seconds, I mean, it's a 50-second burn, I'm sorry, but at 49 seconds, 1 second to go, we completely disintegrated. And they don't really know what the disintegration force was, but NASA did do an investigation of this failure, and they determined that the heat flux from the rocket plume was much higher than what we had designed for. And it was an error in the table that we were using for the geometry of how much the nozzle stuck out the rocket. So part of this was, like, I get down to, you learn more from your failures than your successes. This led to us coming up with a lot more rigor and a lot more questioning we question everything now. We don't, if someone gives us a table, it's like, show us the analysis. If we think that the analysis is not very rigorous, we will go hire somebody else to do a separate analysis with a separate method. And we kind of keep them blind to each other, and we look at the data. But we are much more cautious. We don't let our successes give us the hubris where we think we know we're doing everything right and other people's input doesn't count anymore. So this made us much more cautious, and I'm just, in your career, please just keep that in mind. Like, keep this moment where if someone's handing you something and saying, this is good, and it's like, well, where'd you get it? And if they're telling you, I got it out of a paper, I got off the internet, bring in the author or have somebody else analyze the data. But just, to me, this is, as, people think, like, when the, that last 2 minutes right before DART hit that asteroid, they kind of thought I was, like, going to be, like, super confident. And they go, how did you feel? You must have felt great. And my answer was, I felt relieved. And it was like, you're leading a team, you're trying to get something done. It is hard. Don't be over cocky. Just remember that there are failures out there. You don't want to be one of them. And the way to do that is just be cautious and don't accept things just because someone tells you to accept them. And so that's a picture of contour during the build. Picture on the right is what the spacecraft looked like, pretty much right at the moment of launch. The picture on the left is showing us installing the solid rocket motor that allowed us, or almost allowed us, to escape. If we had held together 1 second more, everything would have probably worked out just fine. And then this is what a bad day looks like. This is my last slide. So those little pebbly things, those are stars. And so that's a double image where the ground telescope is taking a picture, and then it's waiting a couple seconds, and it's taking the same picture of the star field. It's tracking the star field as it's waiting that 10 seconds. So those pebbly things are stars. You see, like, you see a black streak. Let me see if I can do a mouse. You see a black streak here that looks just like a black streak here. A white streak here, and then you see the same thing here, black streak, white streak. Those are two pieces of contour taken, moving against a star field. But that's what a bad day looks like. I don't want you guys to have bad days. So just be cautious, keep that in mind, question everything, assume nothing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is fascinating. Science fiction meeting reality. This is really great. Any questions? Is there any question for Ed? Go ahead. You need to press. There is. Yeah. There you go.
So has there been any science done in terms of figuring out how you would redirect an asteroid with a nuclear weapon? Because you mentioned that.
So. We don't do. We have other.
Yeah.
We're loaded with scientists. So you have people who do kinetic impact, and and there's one of the things they found, like we hit, it looks like an Easter egg. It's basically rubble that's just the gravity of each object is attracted to its nearby object. So in my head, I view the asteroid we hit as like a water balloon. You know, we hit it, it probably did a little bit of this, and it reshaped itself. There's other scientists, and probably at places like Los Alamos and Sandia and Lawrence Livermore, they look at hitting things with nuclear weapons. And I think you actually don't want to be right up on the object when you hit it. You actually want to be a little bit off of the object. That's about all I can say. Not because it's secret, because that's the limit of my knowledge of it. My goal was hit this rock, and that's where I focused.
Oh, hello. Fascinating presentation. I wanted to ask, you mentioned FPGAs as a new technology. Could you tell us a little bit about like how the technology that you use and materials that you use in the design of the spacecraft has changed over years?
So ever since I've been doing this for 40 years, and honeycomb aluminum is a big favored material. It was on the first spacecraft I worked on, and it was on DART. It's on IMAP now, but we didn't do anything special about, like, we didn't put like a hardened edge on DART or a special shape. We actually had people look at just what's the right orientation. If the asteroid's a round object, how close to center did we have to hit to meet our move requirement of changing its orbit by 10 seconds? The answer came back after all the simulation was we could have hit it anywhere, and even we could have almost had a glancing blow, and we would have met that requirement. But there's nothing special about how DART was made, and the materials tend to be, honeycomb aluminum and T6 if it's solid, T6 aluminum, but nothing special.
You mentioned the FPGAs there. Are there any advantages to the FPGAs other than the fact that they're flexible in the field? Like, do they have radiation resistance, or is there anything?
I think we were just tired of dealing with microprocessor vendors. But there was a pipeline architecture in DART because, like, DART held no memory, like no real image memory, because if you're coming in and hitting, there's nothing, there's no good reason to store it. So we did have an architecture that we were pulling data out of the camera at 3 megabits per second. And so we'd have a pipeline that would be going to the radio and the encoding algorithms for the radio that was as quick as possible, because, like, we know when we hit, we still had a good image in the spacecraft that would never get transmitted. So we were trying to get the data out of the spacecraft as much as possible. But then we also tapped off of that data line into the tracking algorithms, just so that they could start, they had to figure out how to fire the thrusters just to kind of get on a trajectory to hit the asteroid. And it's kind of scary when you're watching that last 50 minutes, and you're watching, like, because it's thrusters, and there's time periods where you'll actually lose the asteroid will leave the field of view of the imager, and you're like, please come back, please come back, please come. And in the algorithm, it knows exactly where the asteroid is, and it's just optimizing when to fire thrusters to get back, so that it gets back onto the asteroid without overshooting. So it doesn't want to just start doing this. So but when it's happening and you've seen it, like we did, like, probably 5 or 6 full day mission sims with the full team. So we saw this behavior, we knew it was gonna happen. But we had people behind us, like we had senators that were in the fishbowl behind us. We had Bill Nye, the science guy, Cal Ripken was back there, and it's like, and you had to have people saying, it's okay, it's gonna come back. But I was relieved when it hit the asteroid.
All right, I have two on Zoom. First is from Jordan. He says, wonderful presentation. What techniques are used to determine the number of NEOs present in each category? If we don't know where they are, how do we know how many there are?
So you're asking a project manager a science, and I think it's probably a statistics question that they. I'm not the right person to answer it, but there is an established field that, given the sampling of what we know, and I think understanding the phenomenon of where asteroids come from, I think there's a good boundary as to how many there are and how we know we only know 40% of them to date. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sorry.
I have a question. I'm wondering, what if DART failed? What were the stakes?
There likely would not have been a DART 2. Like, they would have probably just, the mission NEO-WISE, the one that will launch probably in 2028, it's not launching sooner because it's money constrained, but it's a good idea. Like, if we get NEO-WISE up there and its performance is great, and instead of mapping things above 140 meters, it's good enough to map things 80 meters in diameter and up.
So were there a chance this asteroid would have hit the Earth?
No. This one will never, ever, even with us hitting it, like it was a lot of effort was made to make sure that we were not going to do anything, and we're talking like 6 sigma, just laws of physics, that there was no way that this asteroid was going to hit Earth. These little debris pieces that we talk about, this meteor shower 10 years from now, these are little rice-sized pieces of debris that picked up a lot of energy on the impact. And so there's no danger that this asteroid will ever hit Earth. But if we had failed, they probably would not have repeated this mission. They probably would have said, it's more important for us to map as many asteroids just to see if we have a problem. Because it's possible that if we start mapping all of them, pick a number, like Chelyabinsk, everything larger than Chelyabinsk, if we mapped all of them and we found out we really don't have a problem for the next 2,000 years, we're in a good state.
So if an asteroid is coming to Earth, then it would be safe to say one can replicate DART so that it deflects. Can we do that?
You've seen Congress move with funding lately. It takes money to do anything. That's my biggest worry is we'll know how to do it, and we'll just end up in a situation where just trying to get the funding will become a political football. So I don't know.
All right, this one is for Dominic. As members of industry and academia, what can we do in our own work and research to produce a benefit for future NASA missions? As a program manager for these spacecraft missions, what would have been useful for you to have had that might have come from students and engineers outside of your organization?
So the easy, or I don't know what the hard answer is, like the one that would require so every 10 years, there's something called the decadal survey, in which the science folks and they're not funded by NASA, they're funded by the National Science Foundation. They do the decadal survey as to what are the fundamental science questions that really need answering now. And as part of that, they'll come up with some mission concept, like we need to go to the moons of Mars, and we need to look for this material or this phenomenon. And then NASA, National Science Foundation will fund places like APL and JPL and Southwest Research to actually come up with mission concepts that would do it. But long story short, a report gets written, it's about that thick, it's big, it comes out every 10 years. NASA reads it. NASA really this is their Bible as to what they should be doing. If you're interested in trying to steer the course as to what goes into the decadal survey, you write white papers as to here's what I think is cool or scientifically interesting, or we're on the cusp of new technology that will enable us to do this. But so the people that write the decadal survey, they read those white papers. So that's an input into what's written in the decadal survey. And then once the decadal survey comes out, you can read the decadal survey and see what direction is NASA looking to go for the next 10 years. And if they don't get stuff done in 10 years, stuff tends to be on the next decadal survey. But so be very aware of the decadal survey process. You can be an input to it, but then you can also exploit what's written in it. Yes?
I wonder, as a project manager and for big missions like this, to what extent is the challenge on the technical aspects versus the organizational aspects of bringing different teams together and different expertise and making sure that everyone is integrating correctly? To what extent is the technical part difficult, whereas is the organization part difficult?
My boss says every mission should have one miracle, which is kind of here's the unknown technology or immature technology that's got to work for this mission to be successful. He usually says it because he's complaining because we've been given 5 miracles to have happen. So for the most part, you want to have, heritage is a big word, where heritage means it has flown on a previous mission, and ideally not 20 years ago, but like in the last 3 or 4 years, so that the people are still around, the materials are still around, and it's well understood. So you want to have, and early on a mission's development, you do have things like heritage reviews, and people look at technology readiness levels, TRL. You want to have, TRL 6 means it has flown in space before, and it's well understood, and it is applicable to what we're trying to use it for on this mission. And then you want to have like 1 TRL 5, which is like it hasn't flown in space before, but we've done a lot of testing in the laboratory and we're feeling pretty good. But you don't want to have a lot of TRL 5s, but it's systematically looked at. It's looked at from the very beginning, and if you see TRL 5s or TRL 4s, that will start throwing red risk flags. It's dumpster on fire.
And for this mission, what were some miracles that had to happen?
This one?
Yeah.
This one had, you saw that list of new technologies. Some were challenging, like in the end, I think making the Draco telescope, that really was a TRL 6. We just adapted it from New Horizons. We adapted missile technology. That's probably a TRL 5 because that was not space technology. But we did do things like we did those rollout solar arrays. Those were, when we picked them up, we were the first ones to use them. it turned out that they are actually used on space station now. Like they made bigger versions, but space station enjoys the luxury that astronauts can go out and if they jam up, they can unjam them. We didn't have that luxury. So we were all very relieved right after launch when we successfully deployed the solar arrays. Like we were halfway home. Yes.
You mentioned the mission plan to try to detect like incoming solar flares, I think. What's the most amount of like forewarning we could have before like a really big solar flare, and would that knowledge help us to prepare better?
So you see high solar flare, like people call coronagraphic ejections. They say that's the sun coughing. It's just putting out like a million tons of debris in one go. A lot of times that stuff comes off the sun at 1 million miles an hour, and we are 100 million miles away. We're 92 million miles away from the sun, so you have 92 hours to really protect yourself. If you're 1 million miles away, and it's traveling that fast, you have 1 hour. But a lot of things that the power grids do that you're not even aware of is that they will, instead of being networked all together across the United States and Canada, they will open some relays and turn it into smaller grids. And that turning it into smaller grids means that there's less, the wave action of this interaction is controlled. I think the airlines, if they see something big coming within the hour, I think they tell their pilots mostly, do not trust your navigation systems. You're going manual for the near term. And then I think if it's severe, severe and something has passed that 1 million, the 1 hour mark where a spacecraft like IMAP would pick it up, that we had not already seen it, they may leave planes grounded for a short period of time. But I think for the most part, they just say, do not trust your navigation systems. And usually, if it's big, people, we have assets that look at the sun all the time. We have a spacecraft's SDO, Solar Dynamics Observatory. It's looking at the sun all the time in high def. We usually see stuff coming, and we have 92 hours to react. Yes, sir.
I have two questions, one in the follow-up of what he asked. First question is, talking about Apophis, that's expected in 2029. So the altitude at which it's supposed to pass is near to the geosynchronous altitude, right, sir?
It's inside that, or it's just outside of that. It's inside the moon, but it's just outside of the geo belt.
Right. So the currently what NASA says is that it is not considered a threat as of now, and it's a clear projection. But just in case, from your perspective as a project manager, do you see that NASA, would have a contingency plan for it, just in case something goes off?
For Apophis, the confidence of Apophis' path is very, very high. NASA does, every 2 years, they do tabletop exercises where NASA invites all the US agencies, and FEMA is a strong player in this, but, and then they invite, they strongly encourage the world, all the other countries to attend these tabletop exercises. But they go through, every 2 years, they come up with a different scenario as to, what do we know at what time, and how do we get countries to interact for the greater good of humankind as a whole. Because in these scenarios, what you find is like, when weeks out, well, when you're months out, everything's collapsed into days. But early on, you'll say, oh, it's this broad area, and you get good cooperation from everybody. But then it's like, and then a couple months will go by, which means like you go in the next day, and they've updated the scenario, and it's instead of half the planet is at risk, it's these 3 countries, and then all these other countries realize that they're not at risk. How do you keep them engaged, and what things of value can they do to participate? But a lot of that is just coordinating of how would we evacuate this area, or who would take the lead on a kinetic impact mission, and is it kinetic or is it nuclear? And then how do you get the UN treaty? You're going to violate a UN treaty if you put a nuclear object in space, and how do you get through that? So they do these tabletop exercises, and the guy in the U.S. who's responsible for the U.S. participation, last one was in Vienna, Austria, and it was only in Vienna, Austria, because that was a nice venue that would attract more countries to come and interact. But so that's happening in general, that there is these real workshops that do occur to move cooperation. Specifically with Apophis, Apophis is big, but we know Apophis' trajectory really, really well, that it is truly not a threat. But if that was coming toward Earth, if we knew it was coming toward Earth, there'd be a completely different response by everybody. That's all I can say. But I can tell you, as a project manager, this type of thinking is not at the project management level. It is at the NASA leadership talking with the president level. And I'm just an implementer of a small part of what's trying to happen.
And the second question would be, you answered to the previous questioner that we had 92 hours of preparation in terms of a solar flare comes for a damage or something. So I mean, I might be wrong, but is it not a type of electromagnetic wave, and can it not come within 8 minutes, reach Earth in 8 minutes?
No, the coronal mass ejections are moving at 1 million miles an hour. I don't know of an electromagnetic. Speed of light is what you're talking about. I don't know of a phenomenon that's damaging to Earth that I hear people talk about. It's always in that 1 million miles an hour is a fast velocity. So that's kind of your worst case scenario. So kind of my answer to you is I'm not quite sure.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, this is from Matthew. Thanks for all the work you did on the DART project. How do you believe space flight or missions like DART would have been changed if NASA had more funding? Also, when you experience failures, how do you work past them and still keep a mission viable?
Okay, so I forget what the first question is, but let me try to address the second. So there's always stuff that happens along the way that, like when we launched DART and we did that, remember when we were looking at Jupiter and the moons of Jupiter as a proxy for asteroids? We found that our heaters, when it got cold, the heaters would turn on and they'd stay on, and the whole spacecraft would heat up like 8 degrees Celsius. And that's the way the thermostats worked. And so every half hour, spacecraft was bouncing in temperature 8 degrees Celsius. And what that was doing was it was causing the spacecraft to bend like a banana. And So if you saw, like, Draco had a star tracker here, and it has an IMU buried in the spacecraft. The algorithm was very sensitive to the alignment of the Draco imager with the star tracker. And if you're bending like a banana, you're doing this. And so when we launched, we had a probability of hitting the asteroid of about 95%. And then when we did this test and we saw this banana bending, we ran our Monte Carlo simulations, and they'd come in and they'd say, it's not half bad, but basically our probability of impact went from 95% to 50%. So we had a 50% chance of missing the asteroid. And so we didn't give up. We actually figured that instead of relying on the thermostats, let's take the spacecraft colder, and then we would just use just power circuits to turn on and off the heater circuits. Instead of half an hour cadence, we turn them on for 30 seconds, we turn them off for 30 seconds, on 30 seconds, off 30. So we just kind of made a software control of the heaters, but they were operating colder, but that kept this bending. And so at that point, our probability of impact went back from 50 to 95%. And so I'm bringing this up as sometimes failures are small, and you just figure out how to deal with them. There's a lot of smart people out there. Let them be creative. Sometimes the failures are bigger, and if they're so big you can't get beyond it, you have to accept it and be open about it and learn from it.
The other question was, how do you believe space flight or missions like DART would have been changed if NASA had more funding?
I don't know if they would have changed DART. I think they would have just funded more missions. Like they're overextended, period. Like if you look at, Congress has not been giving NASA a lot of extra money, but they do get NASA to sign up for, more things with space station, and let's develop a new rocket that is got stuff in everybody's congressional district. And so I think given the amount of oversubscription of NASA, I think they would just have applied that to get themselves out of a hole.
All right. I think we've reached to the end of today's session. Thank you very much, Ed. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.